Welcome to the GPHI podcast, Strengths in the Mirror. Simon Matthews here with Liana Lianov, the president and founder of the Global Positive Health Institute, talking about her book, Strengths in the Mirror. This is the final episode in a series on the book. So if you haven't listened to the others, I encourage you to press pause here, go back and locate those and listen to them in order, and the picture will build for you gradually. But today we're going to focus on a chapter in the book that deals with brain strengths. And Liana, I'm going to kick off by asking you if you can just define these for us and indeed separate them from character strengths, which we focused on last time.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Simon, again, for helping to moderate this discussion on strengths in the mirror. And I'm very excited about this last discussion around brain strengths, because this is something that I've been thinking about and writing about and teaching for a number of decades. And it's a slightly more unique, but still a positive psychology approach to our health and well-being. And I've come up with the term brain strengths, but they actually come and originate from the work of the famous psychiatrist in Austria, the Austrian psychiatrist Carl Jung. And he is known ultimately, his work was developed into this Myers-Briggs personality types, but his original work, he did some amazing work on several levels in psychology, and one of them was what he called cognitive functions. So by observing people and observing personalities and also characters, if you will, and archetypes, he noticed that individuals have tendencies. Each individual has a tendency to use one of four cognitive functions to take in information about the world, and one of four functions to make decisions about the world. And those are some important underpinnings in one's approach to life. And as you can imagine, then I was very excited as I was reading about this years ago, to say, well, how can we apply this in daily life for our health and well-being? Since I was well into my passion about behavior change when I discovered these strengths. And to your question, how are they different from the character strengths that we talked about in the last segment? So character strengths are innate elements of what we bring to the table across those 6 domains that we introduced, that are more broadly defined. It's not about how our brain functions. It is our natural way of approaching the world. And it was this wonderful work by Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson to vet this survey that allows one to figure out of the list of 24 character strengths, which are the most compelling for a particular individual, which we call the signature strengths. But we all bring these natural strengths to the table. And so as the audience may recall, we were looking at areas of transcendence, for example, and more broad approaches to life. And so I love that we have these vetted character strengths, and now, as we mentioned, so much research is going on to show that using and intentionally using those character strengths contributes to our well-being and overall success professionally and personally, and we talked about using them in our health behaviors. And so now we're rounding out in general strengths by switching to this more focused area of these cognitive functions, again, the brain strengths, about specifically how we take in information and how we make decisions.
Mm-hmm. How do we go about discovering or uncovering them for ourselves, Liana?
So good question. That's the very first best question is like, okay, how do I find out what my brain strengths are for the uninitiated? So one way to do it is for those who are interested in the Myers-Briggs or maybe already know their Myers-Briggs personality type, that's a place to start. The official proprietary survey of 126 questions is available. Oftentimes it's available through counselors who can then interpret the results. So that's the more formal way. And by knowing one's type, there's a formula that then identifies those two brain strengths for each personality type. Again, one related to taking in information, one related to making decisions. Now, what I've done in Strengths in the Mirror is simplified that to just a more of a tabulation and sort of an initial reaction to, do I tend to do this more often than that, and kind of that initial gut reaction. So clearly it's a quick and dirty way to get an initial idea of where one's leanings tend to be without having to go through the formal survey. And there are actually other intermediate surveys. For example, Dario Nardi, who is a researcher in this area, has an app where you can take maybe 50 or 60 questions, and so that confidence interval is a little tighter. But ultimately, it almost doesn't matter because of which survey you take, because ultimately we've got to read about these kinds of cognitive functions and then pay attention to how we interact with the world on a day-to-day basis and interact with others, and triangulate for ourselves based on what we know naturally about ourselves, what others say about us. And yeah, it's nice to also have a survey to kind of point us in that direction. But it's not going to be, here I take this questionnaire and this is the end all be all. This is who I am and how I interact with the world. That is actually has been one of the criticisms of the Myers-Briggs questionnaire, is that perhaps it's not as validated. Does it really correlate with people's ultimate the way they behave, etc. And so I've stepped away from that and just said, no, it's just a starting place. And whether you take the long survey, short survey, or no survey at all, but just read about it and say, does this apply to me? Does this sound like me most often? And again, it's not that we all the time use a particular brain strengths. In fact, we tend to use all of those, or I should say brain strengths or cognitive functions, all of us, just like we all tend to use all the character strengths. We need all the character strengths, but just some come more naturally than others. So I think of it as a toolbox, and we rummage around in there and we find the right tool for the right situation in order to succeed. It's just that some tools take less energy to apply, and you whip them out, you use them. For example, I'm an extroverted intuitive preference with my personality type. That's my brain strength. So without much effort, I can start pulling together patterns in the outer world and say, wow, well, what these people presented and those people presented and what we know about this environment, here's some interesting ideas. And I just tend to do it without, even like it just pops out and I almost can't help myself. And that kind of brainstorming approach is where my mind naturally goes in taking in information. But at the same time, I'm going to need to, at some point, look at some data and analyze that data as a physician or in other circumstances. And I'm going to need to use a different brain function that may not be my brain strength. The more I use it, the more I apply it, the stronger it becomes, but it will probably never be my natural brain strength. And so there is a analytical approach, decision-making approach in the brain strengths that's called extroverted thinking. and we all need to apply that. For example, got a grocery list, and it's a list of healthy items from the grocery store, and we're walking into the grocery store and we say, we want to do this most efficiently. We want to avoid all those processed foods, etc. Our brain's going to try to figure out, okay, how am I going to work my way through the store? I'm going to go through the fresh produce. I'm going to avoid the center aisles that have all the packaged foods, etc. That's a particular brain strength or brain function, the extroverted thinking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Walking the perimeter of the grocery store.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Liana, that's a great description of, well, a couple of things that stood out to me there. The first is that this is best thought of as a guide or a framework to evoke our own curiosity about ourselves, so that we can examine ourselves more and understand more what comes naturally and easily to us, and those things that we need to be more effortful about. I heard you describe if you like, a real world application of this for yourself in pulling together data and examining data. We've just started to transition, just in what you said, to how we might think about the application of these in the sphere of our own health and well-being. So there's one example, giving some consideration to how we might go about assembling a healthy diet for ourselves. What other ways can we use these to benefit our own health and well-being?
Well, stepping back, I just mentioned in passing that this overall approach of brain strengths and these personality types and the associated cognitive functions, brain strengths, is a positive psychology approach. And by intentionally applying positive activities or positive mindsets, it boosts our sense of well-being, our positive emotions, which can be applied towards any goal, including a health behavior goal. It boosts our energy to tackle it. And so just even at a broader, more global level, acknowledging that we have strengths, acknowledging that we can intentionally apply those strengths, again, character strengths last time, brain strengths this time, and again, apply them towards goals can help us achieve what we want and help us achieve those health behaviors. And in fact, in some of the textbooks that review positive psychology approaches for coaches and mental well-being counselors, the Myers-Briggs personality type is listed as a positive psychology approach. The reason is that it's really looking at each of these strengths that we bring to the table from a positive viewpoint, right? Instead of detriments. These are not detriments. We are explaining our differences, but every one of us have differences that contribute to ourselves and to the greater good. And in fact, of course, character strengths are the same way. Use of character strengths could contribute to the greater good. Brain strengths the same way. So then coming down more specifically, how we can use those brain strengths for our health and well-being, I actually give a few examples in the Strengths in the Mirror book. There's so much more to it. There's an older book that needs to be updated from about a decade ago that's called My Happy Avatar, that gives some examples. It's a little outdated because it connects that with using your digital devices, and so we'll update it, but it does have more in-depth examples for anyone who's interested. And I'm actually working on another book that's actually going to be focused on coaches, but actually anyone who's interested in motivating and boosting and driving their health behaviors using these brain strengths might be interested in that book. So stay tuned, coming soon. But it really is being able to think about each specific health behavior and at what stage of change we're in, and then how can our particular brain strengths help us achieve that. So for example, and just drive us forward, again, using myself as an example, and I've been talking about how each of us has a dominant way that we take in information, in a dominant way that we make decisions. One of those two actually is an overall dominant, and that word is the word that was used by Carl Jung. And so my overall dominant brain strength, again, is this extroverted intuition. And so where I get energized and get my positive emotions and positive energy is that I like to be able to brainstorm many options for achieving a particular goal, including, for example, a healthy eating goal. And I really love to look at a variety of recipes, pick and choose which ones look interesting. And I also like to mix it up and say, well, what are some other ways, some other ingredients, some other ways that we can put together this recipe? It makes it fun, it makes it engaging, it boosts my positive emotions. And I'm just more likely then to achieve and follow through with my goal of healthy cooking and healthy eating.
And Liana, given everything that you've said so far and recalling our previous conversation about character strengths, I think one of the things I'm hearing here is that there is no best or perfect combination. It's a case of the right tool for the right job at the right time.
Absolutely a case for the right tool for the right job at the right time. The caveat being that some tools just come naturally. A good example, oftentimes when we teach these classes, we say it's kind of like, writing with your right hand versus writing with your left hand. If you happen to be right-handed, you don't think about it. You're just writing, you're not thinking, well, what position are my fingers in? But if you switch that pen or pencil to the left hand, you got to slow it down. It takes a little attention, and the result might not be quite as pretty as if you used your right hand. Same with these kinds of brain strengths, but we certainly can use them all, and we should. And that's where you get deeper into sort of psychology and psychoanalysis about how deep can we go to, in a conscious way, apply these strengths. And so this is an area of psychology that I am not as much of an expert in, that Carl Jung and Freud and others are known, that get into the psychoanalysis, that perhaps some of these kinds of brain strengths or kind of functions might be a little out of our reach, like more in our subconscious. Particularly, remember that, so there are 4 that are taking in information, 4 for making decision. There are 8 of them. And so for each preferred personality type, they have a certain order, 1 through 8. And the argument is by the psychologists that probably that when you get down to number 7, number 8, that may not be as easily manageable as a tool. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't work on it and try, but just to be aware and self-aware that, it's going to be a difficult road. And if we think we have it kind of licked, we may not. And so then we get into deep psychoanalysis that we're trying to avoid here, and that I'm trying to avoid. I like to keep things very practical.
Well, I liked that. I appreciate, Liana, that linking that you made between these and the trans-theoretical model of change, or the stages of change model, people often call it. And it strikes me that it's a good reminder to us that in the same way as change is not a binary. You're not either doing something or not doing something. There is an underlying process here that we can understand more about. But there's also different skills that we need to bring to the table, depending on where we are in that particular process of change. We need to be attentive to and be able to nuance our own approach to managing change ourselves, recognizing where on that continuum we might be.
Exactly. So, in fact, I'm so passionate about applying the stages of change because there is so much merit to, as you said, acknowledging that there's a stepwise process. It's not full on and full off. And in fact, if we are not actually practicing a particular behavior that we would like to take on, doesn't mean that we aren't through the stages of change, making some progress towards getting to be ready and preparing to make that change and building that change into an ongoing habit. So that's the trans-theoretical model. And so then being excited about this trans-theoretical model, I was asking the question, well then, so what would that look like for each of the brain strengths? And how can we apply each of the brain strengths for each of the stages of change, and how can we apply it for each major health behavior, like healthy eating, physical activity? And it ended up being a huge project. I did this a number of years ago, a huge chart of, I don't know, several hundred. The pool is about several hundred options that you can put together, because imagine there are actually 16 personality types. If you put all that together, the 8 brain strengths come together and 16 personality types. Plus I gave some suggestions for someone who really doesn't know what their personality type is, and then multiply that by the number of stages of change and by these behaviors. Big undertaking, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it needs a little updating, but it's still fairly robust, and it is the underpinnings of the My Happy Avatar app. It's not an actual app, it's a WordPress website that is at no cost available, and those who are interested in this topic, yes, please check it out, and please contact me. I'm always looking for feedback and beta testers. And just a little side note, there's a companion app for coaches to work with clients who are using these stages of change to nudge them along. I know it's one of your favorite words, Simon. So particularly if there are coaches or people who do counseling in the audience, you might be particularly interested in accessing both of those apps, the adult app, which I call the Awesome Adult app, and then the coaching app. And these will be updated, and we're actually, I'm hopeful we'll have some honed down versions for different populations, for youth, for seniors, for parents, and for health professionals and our own health professional well-being. So lots of ideas, not enough time, but we'll get there. So stay tuned, everybody. And those who are listening and access all of this and you want to engage with me or contribute in building those apps, please contact me. I would love to work with you on that.
Those I'm just reflecting on. I think you said that 700 different elements or ideas you ended up with when you mapped all that out, which sounds like the outworking of those brain strengths that you have, that you referred to earlier, that capacity to look across all this data and draw all this information. Draw all these ideas from the data.
Yes, but to simplify things for our audience.
Oh, good. I'm keen to hear this bit.
Yes, because they're listening going, 700, what is all this? A couple of very concrete examples of how to use brain strengths to boost our health behaviors. First has to do with extroversion versus introversion. And this aligns a little bit with how we normally use those words, extroverted, introverted, but not exactly. So extroverted folks, of course, get energized by being around other people. They're very gregarious. And so, but they also actually externally, by talking, process. This is where the cognitive function comes in. So they can actually think a little better in conversation, and almost extemporaneously, they get new ideas in a discussion. But bottom line is they really get energized by those engaging conversations, by being around other people. So as you can imagine, they could benefit by planning some health behaviors that involve other people. They probably will do better at that than planning to just run on the treadmill by themselves, for example, as a health action plan. And then at the other end of the spectrum are those that prefer introversion, that actually might have their energy lowered by spending too much time around other people, and that they get re-energized, especially after a busy day, some time on their own. And perhaps when they're coming home after a busy day of interacting with lots of people, and they want to plan a physical activity habit is to take a nice long walk by themselves out in nature or on the treadmill, rather than finding a walking buddy, because then the walking buddy is going to be chatty and it might continue to drain their energy. So the extroversion versus introversion is an additional way to look at this approach, even though that's not actually a specific brain strength. Those who see the brain strengths that they're labeled as extroverted versus introverted, well, for every personality type, there's an overall preference with that dominant brain strength for overall extroversion and overall introversion. And it's based on looking at what is my top strength, brain strength. Is that extroverted or introverted? Then that's probably going to dominate where I get my energy from, and I should take advantage of that. The other example for health behavior and using brain strengths, so we're talking about the first letter. If you look at the 4 letters of the MBTI, the last letter is the judging versus the perceiving. And again, that's not a specific brain strength, but it rounds out our approach. It's a little complicated, that formula that goes from the Myers-Briggs to the brain strengths, but just suffice it to say that last letter of judging versus perceiving, judging preference really prefers to have more of a step-by-step and more solidified approach to an action plan. So for example, someone who prefers judging, when they write their action plan, they might tend to do better if they get as specific as possible. Like, I'm going to take a walk every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon during my lunch hour. And that's
so like a smart goal approach.
Yeah. It's just, it feels nice to them. It's like it's done. I have closure. I know exactly what and when I'm going to do. Now, for those who prefer perceiving, that might not always work so well. I mean, we as coaches tend to want our clients to be as specific as possible, but those with perceiving might want a little more spontaneity, and we might need to back that off a little bit and help them make a commitment that they'll take a walk 3 times a week. But we don't know which days of the week, we don't know what time of the day, or even, if they're going to walk with someone or by themselves or in nature on the treadmill. Having a few more options and having that ability for some spontaneity is much more exciting for them, and they're much more likely to follow through.
So the thing that's really kind of ringing out quite strongly for me now, Liana, is the idea of if you're a health professional of some sort, a coach and so on, really know your patient or know your client in order to support them to be able to maximise this, and indeed also cultivate in that client a desire to understand themselves more deeply. And if you're an individual, if you're not a health professional but you're interested in this for yourself, know thyself seems to be key here. Really taking the time to understand what are the things that come most easily and naturally to me, what are the things I have to work harder on, and also critically not becoming judgmental of ourselves. If for example, going to a programmed class on exercise bikes is something that we've tried and just get no joy from and no excitement from, that doesn't mean that we're failing at exercise. It may just mean that we're not sufficiently applying our understanding of ourselves to choose the activity that's really going to help you.
Well said, Simon. Yes. Know thyself.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Liana, for walking us through brain strengths and indeed character strengths and the other elements of strengths in the mirror. This is the final episode in this particular podcast series, drawing out some themes from the Strengths in the Mirror book. If you have stumbled upon this one and haven't listened to the others, I do encourage you to go back and listen to the others as well. And beyond that, if you would like to understand more, then visit positivehealth.world. That's the homepage, the website of the Global Positive Health Institute, a growing trove of data about positive health, the links between positive psychology and lifestyle medicine, how we can apply these principles to not simply survive, but to thrive and flourish in daily life. Positivehealth.world is the place to visit there. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, I encourage you to do that as well, and you'll get notified of new episodes and new videos on various things that the GPHI is doing. Once again, Liana, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through Strengths in the Mirror.
Thank you so much. Again, Simon, for being such a lovely moderator, and thank you to our audience for following this Strengths in the Mirror series. And like Simon says, please check out all the other offerings from the Global Positive Health Institute. We now have memberships we're offering and so much more. And we look forward to seeing you again on another one of our GPHI podcasts. So take care, everybody. Be safe and be well.